Anna and her husband, John, had just bought an old farmhouse in rural Ohio. It was their dream home, but they quickly discovered that the basement had an unsettling presence. Anna had often heard whispers from the basement, but every time she went to investigate, there was nothing there. One night, after a strange incident where the basement door opened on its own, Anna decided to confront whatever was haunting them. Armed with a flashlight, she descended into the dark, musty basement. As she walked deeper into the shadows, the temperature dropped, and she heard a faint shuffle behind her. She turned, only to find nothing. But the whispers were louder now, as if someone was standing right behind her, breathing heavily. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the end of the basement, and it wasn't human. It was tall, with elongated arms and glowing eyes. Before Anna could react, the shadow rushed towards her, and she fled in panic, only to find that her husband had been locked out of the house. The next day, they called in paranormal investigators who revealed the chilling history of the house. 2 former residents had mysteriously disappeared from the basement years earlier, and their spirits were said to haunt the house. Ethan, a college student, had rented a small apartment in an old building on the outskirts of town. The basement was known to be creepy, but Ethan didn't think much of it until he started hearing strange noises late at night. First, it was the sound of footsteps, then faint, desperate screams coming from below. When he investigated the basement, he found it empty, but the noises continued, always late at night, getting louder and more frantic each time. One evening, Ethan decided to stay up and listen closely. At exactly midnight, the screams began again, but this time, they were accompanied by the sound of chains rattling. Ethan ventured down to the basement once more, flashlight in hand. The basement was cold, and the floor was wet with what seemed like blood. As he searched for the source of the screams, he found an old, rusty door at the far end, partially hidden by cobwebs. With a deep breath, he opened it, and inside was an old, abandoned room filled with broken furniture and chains hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was a large, dark stain on the floor. As he stepped closer, the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. The screams grew louder, and it felt as if something was closing in on him. He barely managed to escape, and after that night, the apartment was never rented out again. In the 1960s, a young couple, Samantha and Brian, bought a fixer-upper home in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. The house had a large, unfinished basement, and although the rest of the house was in need of repairs, the basement was the most unsettling. Samantha often felt like she wasn't alone when she was in the basement. At night, she would hear rattling chains and a faint whispering voice calling her name. One day, while cleaning the basement, she found a trap door hidden beneath an old rug. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Below was a narrow staircase that led down to a small, cold room. In the center of the room was a metal cage, rusted and worn with age. It seemed like it had been used to imprison someone. As Samantha peered into the cage, she suddenly felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Spinning around, she was face to face with a man who had no face, just a black void where his features should have been. The man grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the cage, whispering that she shouldn't have opened the door. Samantha screamed and broke free, running upstairs to find her husband. When they returned to the basement, the cage was gone. But the whispering voices continued, and Samantha was never the same again. The house was eventually abandoned, and no one would live there for long.